The alarm buzzed earlier than usual, but Arya was already awake, staring at the ceiling, running through the day's mental checklist. Theo's birthday. Pancakes. Work deadlines. Balloons. Rent due in 2 days. She exhaled, rolled out of bed, and padded into the kitchen. The apartment was small, but she'd made it home. Colorful magnets covered the fridge, Theo's drawings framed the walls, and the scent of vanilla lingered from last night's attempt at baking. She flipped on the coffee machine and reached for the pancake mix when a pair of small feet padded into the kitchen. Theo, all messy hair and sleepy eyes, yawned dramatically. "You're up early," she teased, ruffling his curls. "Birthday rule," he said, stretching. "Gotta start the day as soon as possible." She laughed and nudged him toward the table. "Then you sit, and I'll get the birthday pancakes going." 15 minutes later, a stack of golden pancakes, shaped into something vaguely resembling a dinosaur, sat in front of him. He grinned, drowning them in syrup. "Presents now?" he asked, mouth full. "Chew first, then gifts," she said, sipping her coffee. "I need at least a little caffeine before the chaos." Theo inhaled the pancakes with the efficiency of a child on a sugar mission, then practically sprinted to the modest pile of gifts waiting in the living room. Arya followed, balancing her coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, scanning for any urgent work emails. He tore through the wrapping paper: new sneakers, a book about space, a Lego set he'd been begging for. His excitement made every sacrifice, every late night working, worth it. And then, as the last gift was unwrapped, something unexpected. A plain white envelope, unmarked. Theo frowned. "This isn't from you?" She shook her head, reaching for it. The paper felt thick, expensive, and inside, a folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it, her heart picking up speed. It was a letter. Her eyes darted to the signature at the bottom: Theo. She frowned. "Theo, did you write this?" He was too busy assembling his Lego set to pay attention. "Huh? No. What does it say?" She looked back at the letter. It was dated 15 years in the future. Her stomach tightened. Her eyes moved to the message, scrawled in unfamiliar, slightly shaky handwriting. "Don't trust the man you're about to meet." Her pulse roared in her ears. The apartment suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. She read it again. It didn't change. The date still placed it years into the future. The signature still read Theo. This was a joke. Had to be. But from who? She forced a smile, folding the letter quickly. Nothing. Just a silly note. Probably a mix-up. Theo barely glanced up, too busy sorting Lego bricks by color. Arya set the letter aside and went back to sipping her coffee, but the warmth had left it. She forced herself to brush it off. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe one of the neighborhood kids thought it would be funny. But as much as she tried to shake it, the words lingered. That evening, the apartment was filled with the sound of laughter, chatter, and the faint hum of a slightly out-of-tune birthday song. Stella arrived with a ridiculous party hat, refusing to take it off even when Theo begged her to. "Birthday tradition," she announced, flicking the pom-pom on top. "Non-negotiable." Theo rolled his eyes dramatically but grinned, taking a break from his mountain of cake to argue about the best superhero. Arya leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the chaos with amusement. Stella sidled up next to her, stealing a bite of frosting from Theo's plate. "You've got that face," Stella said, mouth full. Arya arched a brow. "Which face?" "The one where you're thinking too hard about something." "Spill." Arya hesitated, then reached for the envelope on the counter and passed it to her. Stella read it, then snorted. "What is this? A plot twist from a sci-fi movie?" Arya shrugged. "It was in his presence. I didn't put it there." Stella read it again, then flipped it over, inspecting it like a detective. Weird. Exactly. You think someone's messing with you? That's the thing, I don't know who would. And why? Stella squinted at the handwriting. It's not Theo's. Nope. Theo's dad? Arya stiffened. No. He's not involved. At all. Stella held up a hand. Just covering all possibilities. They both looked at the letter again. It's creepy, Arya admitted. And oddly specific. Stella waved the letter dramatically. Oh no. The mystery man of your future. Beware. Arya rolled her eyes. I'm serious. I know. But realistically, it's probably some weird joke. Arya nodded, but she wasn't convinced. Stella folded the letter and handed it back. Keep it. Just in case. Arya smirked. In case what? I need future life advice? In case you meet some guy and he starts giving off major horror movie vibes. Theo suddenly ran over, waving his new book. Mom, did you know there are more stars in the universe than grains of sand on every beach? Arya smiled, tucking the letter into her pocket. That's a lot of stars, bud. And just like that, the conversation shifted. The birthday carried on, laughter and cake distracting her from the quiet weight in her pocket. But as she blew out Theo's candles with him, making the same wish she always did, that he would always be safe, she couldn't ignore the whisper of unease curling around her thoughts. Arya pulled into the school drop-off lane, craning her neck to check the time. She was already running behind. Theo, unfazed by the morning rush, hummed to himself in the back seat as he zipped up his backpack. Got everything? She asked, watching him in the mirror. He nodded, slinging his bag over one shoulder. Yep. Oh. Wait. He dug around and pulled out a slightly squished cupcake from yesterday's party. Can I give this to Mr. Lane? She grinned. Your teacher gets a birthday cupcake? He said he liked chocolate. Arya reached over to straighten his collar. Then that's a very nice thing to do. Theo leaned in for a quick hug before hopping out of the car. He jogged toward the front doors, pausing just before disappearing inside. He turned back and waved. Arya waved back, the warmth of the moment settling in her chest. As she pulled out of the lot, her eyes flicked to her purse on the passenger seat, where the letter still sat, folded tightly. She hadn't thrown it away, hadn't mentioned it again, but it was there, lingering in the back of her mind like an unfinished sentence. She arrived at work 5 minutes late, slipping into her desk with a murmured apology to her boss. The boutique financial consulting firm was small, a tight-knit office of 15 employees. Her role was a mix of numbers and strategy, helping clients reorganize their finances, cut unnecessary costs, and make smarter investments. It was steady, predictable. She liked predictable. By lunchtime, she had almost convinced herself the letter was nothing. She grabbed her salad from the office fridge and was about to settle in when her boss, Diana, popped her head in. Arya, do you have a minute? She set her fork down. Of course. Diana led her into the glass-walled conference room where a man stood, hands in his pockets, studying the city view. He turned when they entered, offering a smooth smile. This is Marcus Sullivan, Diana said. He's looking to restructure some business finances, and I immediately thought of you. The moment she heard his name, something inside her lurched. Marcus extended a hand. It's a pleasure. Arya hesitated for half a second before shaking it. His grip was firm, confident. He looked exactly like the kind of man who made headlines, sharp suit, controlled charm, the kind of presence that made people lean in. Marcus is the owner of Sullivan Enterprises, Diana continued. They're growing fast, but expansion comes with challenges, and he needs guidance in long-term structuring. I told him you'd be the perfect person for the job. Arya forced a polite nod, her stomach twisting. Marcus smiled. I'd love to go over the details, maybe over lunch? Her throat felt tight. The letter. The warning. She knew this was irrational. People like Marcus didn't just walk into her life with villainous intent. But logic didn't stop her pulse from quickening. Diana beamed. Perfect. I'll leave you two to it. As Diana left, Marcus gestured toward the door. Shall we? She could say no. She could fake a scheduling conflict. But saying no would seem strange, and she wasn't about to explain why she was suddenly suspicious of a successful businessman over a mysterious letter from an impossible future. So she nodded and followed him out. The restaurant was quiet, upscale but understated. Marcus ordered a bourbon, Arya stuck to water. So, he said, settling in. Tell me about you. She blinked. Me? He chuckled. I'm sure we'll get to my financial issues eventually, but I like to know who I'm working with. Her professional instincts told her to keep things formal, but there was something effortless about the way he spoke, like he had all the time in the world to listen. Against her better judgment, she found herself easing into the conversation. She told him how she got into financial consulting, how she loved the puzzle of fixing numbers that didn't quite add up. She mentioned Theo in passing, and Marcus leaned in slightly, asking about him in a way that felt genuine. I have a niece about his age, he said. Smart kids are the best company. Arya smiled, but something inside her remained wary. Marcus was charismatic in the way powerful men often were, every word polished, every reaction measured. But he also had an ease about him, a quiet confidence that made people trust him. She hated that it was working on her. The conversation eventually turned to business. Marcus laid out his company's expansion plans, the risks, the mistakes they wanted to avoid. He was sharp, aware of the challenges, but he admitted he needed outside expertise. I trust the people I hire to know what I don't, he said. And Diana says you're the best. It was flattery, but she couldn't deny the compliment sat nicely. By the time they left the restaurant, she was unsettled, not because of anything Marcus had done, but because of how easy it had been. Back at her desk, she stared at the notes she'd scribbled. This was a good opportunity. A huge client. But the letters sat heavy in her purse. The days that followed did nothing to settle her unease. Marcus made it a point to check in, sometimes stopping by the office, sometimes sending an email that was just a little more personal than necessary. It wasn't inappropriate, but there was an undeniable warmth to it. Diana was thrilled. He's obviously impressed with you. Arya didn't know what to think. Then came the invitation to a charity gala. He phrased it casually, it would be great for you to network, meet some key players, but she knew better. A client didn't invite their consultant to something like this unless it was personal. She hesitated for hours before finally saying yes. Stella practically exploded when she told her. Oh my God, she said, flopping onto Arya's couch. A black tie event with Mr. Tall, dark, and possibly dangerous? This is movie-level stuff. Arya tossed a pillow at her. It's business. It's business that happens to involve expensive champagne and designer gowns. Arya sighed. I shouldn't be doing this. Why not? She hesitated. Something feels off. Stella sat up. Because of the letter? Arya rubbed her temples. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud. Stella considered her. Look. I get it. It's weird. But Marcus seems normal, right? He does. No creepy vibes? No. Stella leaned in. Then go. Worst case scenario? It's boring. Best case scenario? You have a great time and make incredible connections. Arya still wasn't convinced, but she knew she was running out of excuses. The night of the gala, Marcus sent a car. Arya stepped out onto the sidewalk, adjusting the hem of her dress, feeling out of place in something so elegant. Marcus was waiting near the entrance, effortlessly polished in a tux. He smiled when he saw her. "You clean up well." She smirked. "So do you." Inside, the event was dazzling, glittering chandeliers, murmurs of old money, champagne flowing effortlessly. Marcus kept a hand on the small of her back as he guided her through the room, introducing her to executives, investors, people who shook her hand like she was already one of them. She hated how much she liked it. Marcus was charming, attentive, the kind of person who made others feel important just by being near him. And despite every internal warning screaming at her, she felt herself lowering her guard, just a little. By the end of the night, as they stepped outside into the cool evening air, Marcus turned to her with a knowing smile. "I have a feeling this won't be our last night out," he said. Arya knew she should be cautious. She knew she should remember the letter. But as he held the car door open for her, she found herself smiling back. Arya had spent years cultivating an instinct for trouble, small alarms that went off in her mind when something didn't add up. The problem was, she couldn't tell if those alarms were real or if they were just echoes of that letter sitting at the bottom of her purse. After the gala, she did what any rational person would do. She researched Marcus. Not in a casual, let me just Google him way, but in a full-scale, late-night, coffee-fueled deep dive that had her clicking through article after article, scrolling through business profiles, even checking public records. It all pointed to the same thing: he was exactly who he said he was. Every article praised him, his business acumen, his philanthropic contributions, the scholarships he funded, the shelters he supported. He had a reputation for smart, aggressive expansion but wasn't known for cutting corners. If there was dirt, it wasn't anywhere she could find it. She almost felt embarrassed for being suspicious. Almost. While she was busy convincing herself she had overreacted, Theo had become noticeably quieter. At first, she assumed it was just exhaustion from the birthday excitement, the sugar crashes, the emotional high of turning 10. But the silence stretched into days. His usual enthusiasm dimmed. One night, she walked past his bedroom and saw him sitting up in bed, covers pulled tight, staring at the window like he expected someone to climb through it. She leaned against the doorframe. "You okay, buddy?" Theo flinched, blinking rapidly as he turned to her. "Yeah." Arya frowned. "Bad dream?" His fingers twisted in the blanket. "It's nothing." She sat on the edge of the bed. "You sure? You've been kind of quiet." Theo nodded too quickly. "Just tired." Arya didn't push. She kissed the top of his head, smoothed back his curls, and turned off the light. But as she left his room, she made a mental note: something was off. At work, Marcus became a fixture in her day. His emails landed at the top of her inbox, his messages arrived with just the right balance of professionalism and warmth. He dropped by the office casually, bringing coffee, asking her opinion on business matters that stretched beyond her job description. On paper, it was flattering. In reality, it made her stomach twist. It started with small things: his insistence that she be included in high-level meetings, his eagerness for her input on restructuring plans. Then came the bigger moves. "We need to move quickly on this," he told her one afternoon, sliding a proposal across the table. Arya glanced at the document. It was a major investment in a tech startup that, by her estimation, was still too risky. "This is a lot, Marcus. You're sure about this?" He smiled, effortlessly persuasive. "Trust me. I've done my research." That was the thing: he always seemed to have an answer ready, as if he anticipated her hesitations before she voiced them. She spent her lunch break staring at the numbers. Something felt off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Was it the deal? The speed? Or was she just looking for a reason to justify her unease? That evening, she met Stella for a drink. She didn't mean to bring it up, but the moment Stella asked how things were going, it spilled out. "He's pushing too hard," Arya admitted, swirling the straw in her iced tea. "Not just at work, but with me. It's all happening too fast." Stella leaned in. "So pump the brakes." Arya sighed. "It's not that easy. He's my biggest client." "And what, you're contractually obligated to date him?" "I'm not dating him." Stella gave her a flat look. "He sent a car to pick you up for a gala. That's not exactly a business casual arrangement." Arya rubbed her temples. "It's not just that. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "He makes it hard to say no. Everything he says makes sense. But I can't shake the feeling that if I agree to one thing, I'll end up agreeing to everything." Stella sat back. "That's a huge red flag." "Is it?" Arya asked, half hoping for reassurance, half dreading the answer. Stella didn't hesitate. "Yes." Arya exhaled, pressing her fingers against her temples. "Then why do I feel like I'm the crazy one?" Stella shook her head. "You're not. And you need to trust that instinct, because if you don't, you're gonna wake up one day and realize you let him make every decision for you." Arya wanted to argue, to point out that she was careful, that she was weighing every decision. But Stella was staring at her like she already knew all the ways Arya would try to rationalize it. Later that week, Marcus stopped by her office unexpectedly, a sleek black box in his hands. "This is for you," he said, setting it down in front of her. Arya hesitated. "What is it?" "Open it." She lifted the lid and felt her breath catch. Inside was a delicate diamond necklace, simple but expensive. "I can't accept this," she said immediately. Marcus laughed, easy and unbothered. "It's a thank you gift." "For what?" "For everything. Your insight, your time." He tilted his head. "For putting up with me." She forced a smile. "I appreciate it, but this is too much." Marcus leaned against her desk, watching her with an amused expression. "Arya, I run a multi-million-dollar company. This is barely a splurge." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" She hesitated, and he took that moment to press forward. "I don't expect anything in return," he said. "It's just a gift." It was just a gift. Just a necklace. Just a moment of generosity. Arya had been raised to be polite, to not make a scene, to not overthink gestures of kindness. So when Marcus reached forward and fastened the necklace around her neck, she let him. The clasp clicked into place, cool metal against her skin. She told herself it was fine. That it didn't mean anything. But the weight of it stayed with her long after he left the room. Theo had always been the kind of kid who wore his emotions on his sleeve. If he was happy, the whole room knew. If something was bothering him, it usually spilled out in rapid-fire questions or restless energy. But lately, he had been quiet. Too quiet. Arya noticed it in the small things. How he left his favorite cereal half-eaten. How his usual excitement over space documentaries had dimmed. How, when she asked about his day, he gave her short answers instead of his usual long-winded descriptions. It gnawed at her, this shift. That night, as she walked past his bedroom, she saw him sitting up in bed, his covers clutched tightly in his hands. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of his nightlight, and he was staring at the window as if expecting something, or someone, to be there. She leaned against the doorframe. "Couldn't sleep?" Theo flinched, turning toward her. He tried to play it off, giving her a quick nod, but she could see it in his face. She stepped into the room, sitting at the edge of his bed. "Buddy, what's going on?" His fingers twisted in the blanket. "Nothing." Arya sighed. "That's not true." Theo hesitated, his jaw tightening in that stubborn way she recognized all too well. She reached out, smoothing his curls the way she had since he was a baby, and the tension in his shoulders loosened just a little. "Is it the nightmares?" she asked softly. His lips pressed together. He nodded. "Do you want to talk about them?" He shook his head, then hesitated. His voice was small when he finally spoke. It was about him. A sharp, uneasy feeling settled in Aria's stomach. She kept her voice calm. "Who?" Theo swallowed hard. "I don't know," he admitted. "But he ruins everything, Mom." The room suddenly felt colder. She forced a steady breath. "What do you mean?" Theo looked at her, and for a second, she thought he might tell her everything. But then, just as quickly, he shook his head. "It's just a dream." She studied him, wanting to push but knowing better. "Okay," she said finally. "But if you ever want to talk about it, I'm here." He nodded, but she could tell it wasn't enough. Something about this dream had shaken him. And the worst part? Theo had never met Marcus. So why was he afraid of him? The thought sat heavy in her mind as she walked into her bedroom. She picked up the necklace Marcus had given her, letting it dangle from her fingers. It was beautiful. Thoughtful. A gesture that, under normal circumstances, would have been flattering. But between the letter, the nightmares, and the feeling she just couldn't shake, it didn't feel like a gift anymore. It felt like a weight. The next morning, Aria was halfway through her inbox when her phone buzzed. Marcus. He was texting her about an exclusive charity gala that evening. "It's a great event," he wrote. "You should come. Perfect chance to meet key investors." She hesitated, staring at the message. A few minutes later, another text followed. "Don't overthink it. It'll be a great night." It was like he could sense her hesitation. And maybe that was what made her stomach twist. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she texted Stella. "Marcus invited me to a charity gala." "Oh, fancy. Are you going?" "I don't know. Girl. A black tie event with a rich, powerful man? What's the dilemma?" Theo had another nightmare. He said the man in his dream ruins everything. "Okay, that's creepy." "I know. So what are you gonna do?" Aria sighed, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She didn't have an answer. Eventually, she texted Marcus back. "Aria, I'll be there." Marcus sent a car. Of course he did. Because Marcus was the kind of man who made things easy, who smoothed out any wrinkles before they could even form. As she stepped outside, adjusting the hem of her dress, she felt ridiculous. She wasn't built for these kinds of nights. Marcus was waiting at the entrance of the venue, hands in his pockets, his tux perfectly tailored. He smiled when he saw her. "You look stunning." She forced a smirk. "And you're punctual." "Who knew?" He chuckled, offering his arm. She hesitated for half a second before taking it. Inside, the ballroom was dazzling, glittering chandeliers, polished marble floors, expensive laughter floating in the air like background music. Marcus guided her through the crowd with ease, introducing her to investors, executives, people whose last names carried weight. He knew exactly when to lean in, when to add warmth to his voice, when to make people feel like they were the most important person in the room. Aria played along, smiling at the right moments, shaking hands, making small talk. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It started as a small prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the quiet kind of instinct that told her something was off. She turned slightly, scanning the room. And that's when she saw her. A woman. Standing near the back of the room, half-shadowed, her gaze locked on Aria. Something about her was unsettling. Not because she looked strange, if anything, she seemed familiar. But there was something in her expression, something urgent. Arya barely had a moment to process before the woman started moving toward her. She reached Arya's side in seconds, her voice low but firm. "He's not who you think he is." Arya's breath caught. The woman leaned in, just enough for her next words to send ice down Arya's spine. "Trust the letter." Arya's pulse pounded in her ears. Before she could react, before she could ask a single question, the woman turned and vanished into the crowd. Stella didn't even let Arya sit down before launching into her interrogation. "Okay," she said, setting down her iced coffee with a dramatic thud. "Tell me everything. Every detail. Start with the woman at the gala." Arya sighed, sliding into the cafe booth across from her. "She just appeared. She walked right up to me, whispered, 'He's not who you think he is. Trust the letter,' and then vanished." Stella's eyes widened. "Like, full-on, disappeared into thin air, vanished?" "No, she walked away," Arya said, rubbing her temples. "But it was crowded, and by the time I got my bearings, she was gone." Stella leaned in, lowering her voice. "Do you think she was talking about Marcus? Who else would she be talking about?" Arya shot back. Stella made a face. "I don't know. Maybe you've pissed off some secret society, and this is their way of warning you." Arya groaned. "Stella." "Fine, fine," she said, holding up her hands. "But you have to admit, this is weird. First, the letter from the future, then Theo's nightmare, and now a literal stranger telling you to run." Arya exhaled, stirring her coffee absently. "I know. But I did some research, remember? I didn't find anything. He's clean." Stella drummed her nails against the table. "Maybe you didn't dig deep enough." Arya frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying rich men don't get this powerful without some skeletons in their walk-in closets." Arya hesitated. "Even if that's true, where do I start?" Stella sipped her drink, thinking. His past relationships. His business deals. If he's got secrets, someone knows about them. Arya looked down at her phone. "Even if I did want to look into him, I don't exactly have an investigative team at my disposal." Stella smirked. "But you have me." 2 hours and a deep dive into digital breadcrumbs later, they found him. Owen. His name had popped up in old articles alongside Marcus's during the early years of Sullivan Enterprises. They had once been business partners, until, suddenly, they weren't. No official scandals. No big falling out in the press. But Owen had faded from Marcus's world in a way that suggested something had gone wrong. "That's your guy," Stella said, nudging the screen toward Arya. "If Marcus has skeletons, Owen probably helped bury them." Arya hesitated. "What if he doesn't want to talk?" Stella grinned. "Then we make him." Owen wasn't easy to find, but persistence and a little creative online searching led them to a consulting firm in a less glamorous part of the city. Arya didn't even have a plan when she walked into the building, but before she could overthink it, she was standing in front of his office door. She knocked. A moment later, it swung open. Owen looked exactly like a man who had once walked in Marcus Sullivan's circles, sharp features, well-tailored suit, but there was something different in his eyes. Less polish. More weight. "Can I help you?" She swallowed hard. "I need to ask you about Marcus Sullivan." His jaw tightened. "I don't do interviews." "I'm not a reporter," she said quickly. I need to know the truth." He studied her for a long moment, then sighed and stepped aside. 5 minutes. She walked in, nerves buzzing. The office was simple, nothing flashy. If he was making the same kind of money Marcus was, he wasn't showing it. Owen sat across from her, watching carefully. "What do you want to know?" She folded her hands in her lap. You worked with Marcus. You knew him before he became, well, Marcus Sullivan. His lips pressed together. That was a long time ago. But something happened, she pressed. You walked away. Owen exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I didn't walk. I ran. Aria's stomach twisted. Why? He hesitated, as if weighing something in his mind. Then, finally, he spoke. Marcus doesn't just do business. He plays people. Aria's hands clenched. What do you mean? He finds vulnerable people, people who need something, who are looking for stability, for a way forward. He makes them trust him, makes them feel like they're part of something bigger. And then, when they're in too deep, when they need him, Owen paused. That's when he takes everything. Aria's blood ran cold. Are you saying he doesn't just do it in business? Owen interrupted. He does it in his personal life, too. Women. Specifically, single mothers. Aria's breath caught. He finds them when they're struggling, when they need a break. He swoops in, fixes things, makes them feel like they're safe. And then, slowly, he turns it. Gets them to invest. Gets them to sign things. Pulls them into financial deals they don't fully understand. She felt sick. And by the time they realize what's happening, they're in so deep that getting out means losing everything. She tried to swallow past the lump in her throat. How do you know this? Owen met her eyes, something dark flickering there. Because I helped him do it. She felt like she might throw up. He ruined people, Owen said quietly. And I let it happen for too long. Aria stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. She needed air. She needed to get out. Owen didn't stop her. He just gave her a small, tired nod. Get out while you can. She barely heard herself say thank you as she rushed out the door, her pulse hammering in her ears. The letter. Theo's nightmare. The warning at the gala. It was all true. And she had to get out. Now. Aria knew she had to be careful. Walking away from Marcus wasn't as simple as cutting ties. He wasn't the type of man who let things slip through his fingers. He liked control. He anticipated problems before they happened. If he even suspected she was distancing herself on purpose, he'd find a way to pull her back in. So she had to be smart. She started small. The bracelet was the first thing to go. A week after her conversation with Owen, a black velvet box appeared on her desk, along with a note in Marcus's handwriting. Saw this and thought of you. Inside was a delicate diamond bracelet, elegant and absurdly expensive. Aria stared at it for a long moment, fingers hovering over the sparkling stones. This was exactly what Owen had warned her about. Gifts, gestures, little things that made it harder to say no. The moment she accepted it, she'd be taking one step deeper into his world. She called his assistant and told her to send it back. Minutes later, Marcus's name flashed across her phone screen. Didn't like it? She forced herself to sound casual. It was beautiful, but unnecessary. Silence. Then, finally, noted. She put the phone down, exhaling slowly. One battle down. The next step was harder. Marcus had been steadily pushing her toward finalizing a series of business deals, investments, restructuring plans, projects that, on the surface, looked perfectly sound. But Aria had spent years learning how to spot red flags. And now that she was paying attention, they were everywhere. Nothing obvious. Nothing glaring. But something was off. So she stalled. She asked for additional paperwork. She requested meetings she didn't need. She insisted on more research. If Marcus noticed, he didn't say anything, at least, not at first. But the patience didn't last long. One evening, as she was gathering her things to leave work, She heard a knock at her office door. Marcus stood there, relaxed but deliberate. Got a second? She forced an easy smile. Of course. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I wanted to check in, he said smoothly. You've been distracted. She tilted her head. Have I? His lips twitched into something resembling amusement. If you have concerns about the deals we've discussed, I want to address them. No concerns, she said lightly. I just want to be thorough. He studied her for a long moment. Then, his smile widened. I trust you, Arya. She nodded. And I appreciate that. A beat of silence. How about dinner this weekend? He asked. Just to catch up. She hesitated. I don't think that's a good idea. His expression didn't change, but she saw it. The brief flicker of something sharp. Why not? I just think it's best if we keep things professional. A long pause. Then, slowly, he nodded. Of course. But something in his voice made her stomach twist. The next morning, there were flowers waiting on her desk. A dozen white roses. No card. She didn't need one to know who they were from. That afternoon, she was walking Theo home from school when she spotted the car. Black, parked across the street. She forced herself not to react, not to stiffen. But her pulse quickened. Theo tugged at her hand. Mom? Yeah, buddy. You're squeezing my hand too hard. She loosened her grip immediately. Sorry, bud. Just thinking about work. That night, she double-checked the locks on their apartment. At 2 a.m, she woke with a start. Something felt wrong. She climbed out of bed, her heart pounding, and padded toward the front door. Then she saw it. An envelope. Lying just inside the door, as if someone had slid it underneath. Her hands shook as she picked it up. She already knew what it would say. You're almost there. Be careful. She sat down slowly, gripping the letter. She didn't know who had sent it. Didn't know how it had gotten there. But she knew one thing. Whoever had written it was telling the truth. Arya had lived through fear before, the kind that came in late-night fevers and emergency room visits, in overdue bills and uncertain paychecks. But this was something else entirely. This was panic, pure and raw, clawing its way up her throat as she stared at the empty sidewalk in front of Theo's school. He was always there. Every single day. The bell rang, the doors opened, and Theo walked straight to her car with a grin and a fact about black holes or dinosaurs ready to go. But today, he wasn't there. She checked the time again. 10 minutes past dismissal. Her stomach tightened as she grabbed her phone and texted him. Arya, where are you, bud? I'm outside. No response. She tried to tell herself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe he had stopped to talk to a teacher. Maybe he had gone back inside to grab something he forgot. She got out of the car, her legs moving faster than she intended as she rushed toward the school entrance. A handful of kids still lingered, talking and laughing, but none of them were Theo. A teacher stood near the doors, saying goodbye to students. Arya nearly ran to her. Excuse me, she said, her breath uneven. I'm looking for my son, Theo Sullivan. He hasn't come out yet. The teacher frowned. Theo? I saw him leave a little while ago. Arya's body went ice cold. What do you mean he left? She demanded. He always waits for me. The teacher hesitated. I assumed he was with a friend. He didn't look upset, he just walked off like he knew where he was going. That didn't make sense. Theo never left with anyone. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she called the school's front office. The receptionist put her on hold to check the sign-out records, but when she returned, Her answer made the world tilt. Theo left at dismissal, she said, as if it were a simple fact. As if it weren't the most terrifying thing Arya had ever heard. Her fingers gripped the phone so tightly she thought it might snap. She turned, scanning every inch of the street, the sidewalk, the playground, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. Theo was gone. She hit Stella's contact on her phone so fast her fingers slipped. Arya? Theo's missing. The words barely made it past her lips. A beat of silence. Then Stella's sharp inhale. What? Where are you? At school. They said he left, but he wouldn't, Stella. He wouldn't just leave. I'm coming, Stella said immediately. Call the police. Arya was already dialing. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. 911, what's your emergency? My son is missing, she gasped. He's 10. He was supposed to meet me after school, but he's not here. The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady. Can you describe him? What was he wearing? She gave them every detail, from his blue jacket to the small scratch on his cheek from playing soccer over the weekend. We'll send officers to your location, the dispatcher assured her. Stay where you are. Stay where she was? How could she stay still when Theo was out there, somewhere? She turned wildly, looking for anyone who might have seen him. A woman in a crossing guard vest was standing at the corner. Arya ran to her. Did you see my son? She asked desperately. Brown curls, blue jacket, 10 years old? The woman frowned. I think so. I saw a boy like that walking away with someone. Arya's vision swam. With who? I don't know. I thought he was with a parent. He didn't seem scared. Her stomach turned to stone. She stumbled backward, her breath coming in quick, sharp bursts. Think. Where would he go? She ran to the playground, the parking lot, every possible place he could be. Nothing. Her breath hitched. Her mind spiraled. She had never felt so powerless in her life. Then her phone rang. She grabbed it so fast she nearly dropped it. Hello? A woman's voice. Is this Theo's mother? Yes, she gasped. Where is he? He's okay, the woman said gently. He's safe. I found him wandering alone and brought him to a cafe. Arya almost collapsed in relief. Where? The woman gave her an address. She didn't even wait to end the call before she was running to her car. She didn't care that the police were calling after her. All that mattered was Theo. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached as she sped toward the cafe. She parked haphazardly, barely remembering to shut off the engine before throwing the door open and rushing inside. And then she saw him. Theo. Sitting at a booth, clutching a cup of hot chocolate, his face pale and tight. She let out a choked sound, half sob, half relief, and ran to him. She wrapped her arms around him, holding on so tightly she was afraid she might never let go. His small hands clung to her like he was just as afraid to let go. I was so scared, he whispered. She pulled back, cupping his face. What happened, baby? Where did you go? Theo blinked at her, looking confused. I don't know. I was walking home, and then I got confused. And then she found me. Arya's breath caught. She turned to thank the woman who had called her. But the booth was empty. Her stomach dropped. She looked around wildly. Where is she? She asked. Theo frowned. She left. Arya grabbed his hands. Who was she? Theo hesitated, his small brow furrowing. It was you, Mommy. Her breath hitched. No, honey, she said carefully. I wasn't here. Theo looked up at her, serious. It was you, he repeated. But you looked older. The world shifted beneath her feet. The woman at the gala. The letter. The warnings. Her own son was telling her the truth. It had been her. Her future self had saved Theo. Arya sat at the edge of her bed, gripping the letter in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, her breath shallow as she reread the words that had been haunting her since she found it under her door. You're almost there. Be careful. She knew now. She finally, completely knew. She hadn't just been trying to untangle herself from Marcus. She had been fighting for her own future. Every warning, every clue, every knot of fear that had been tightening inside her for weeks, it had all been leading here. The first letter. The woman at the gala. Theo's nightmares. His terrified voice telling her, he ruins everything, Mom. The way Marcus had been testing her lately, his patience wearing thin as he sensed her slipping away. She had ignored so much at the beginning, rationalized things that should have sent her running. But not anymore. Now, she could see everything clearly. Marcus wasn't going to let her go easily. She knew that. He had spent too much time weaving his influence into her life, professionally, personally. He had been setting her up for something, and now that she was resisting, he was going to make his final move. Her stomach churned. If she made one wrong step, if she let him pull her into the next phase of his plan, it wouldn't just be her that suffered. It would be Theo, too. She couldn't let that happen. She closed her eyes for a long moment, forcing herself to breathe. She needed to be ahead of him. And the only way to do that was to play the game one last time. She reached for her phone, hesitating for only a second before she pulled up Marcus's contact and pressed call. The phone rang twice before he answered. Arya, he said, smooth as ever, his voice laced with warmth. This is a nice surprise. Hey, she said, keeping her tone light. I've been thinking. I feel like I've been overanalyzing things. A brief pause. Then he exhaled, as if laughing softly. Oh. She forced a small chuckle. Yeah. I think I got too caught up in my own head, overcomplicating things. You were right. I trust you. I just needed to remind myself of that. Another pause, this one slightly longer. She could hear the shift in his voice when he finally responded. I'm really glad to hear that. She knew exactly what that meant. She had given him an answer he wanted. Now he would ease up, back off just enough to lull her back into a sense of security. She smiled, though he couldn't see it. Let's meet for dinner. I want to talk about the next steps. Another beat of silence. Then, that sounds perfect. She ended the call, her hands still steady. Step 1, make him believe her. Step 2, cut every single tie before he realized what she was doing. She spent the next several hours unraveling every legal connection between them. The consulting work? She had never officially signed anything binding. The investments? She had stalled long enough that nothing was in her name. The contracts? She hadn't put a single signature on paper. Still, she went through everything twice, making sure there was no loophole, no fine print Marcus could use against her. By the time she was done, her head ached, but she wasn't finished yet. She pulled out a separate folder, the one she had been building ever since Owen told her the truth. Every note, every inconsistency, every red flag she had ignored for too long. This wasn't just about escaping Marcus. She was making sure he never did this to anyone else again. She checked the time. 2 hours until dinner. She needed a plan. A way out that wouldn't leave any trace of her in his world. And then, once she was free, she needed to make sure he had no way of pulling her back in. Arya had been waiting for this moment. She had spent weeks untangling herself from Marcus's grip, removing every thread he had tried to weave into her life. She had stalled deals, refused gifts, sidestepped his questions, and carefully unraveled every connection before he could tighten the net around her. And now, finally, he was making his move. His message arrived late in the evening, a simple text that carried more weight than he could have imagined. "Marcus, I have something exciting to discuss. The opportunity we've been waiting for." She stared at the screen, her heart beating steadily. This was it. This was what he had been working toward. The final push to secure her, to tie her so completely to him that she wouldn't be able to break free. She had expected this. He had been testing her for weeks, pressing at the edges, gauging her reactions when she hesitated, watching her carefully when she pulled back. He had played the patient game, but now, patience was no longer an option. She let the silence stretch for a few minutes before responding. "Arya, sounds exciting. When can we meet?" His response came immediately. "Marcus, tomorrow morning. I'll send a car." She let a small, humorless smile tug at the corner of her lips. He thought she was walking willingly into his trap. He had no idea he was walking into hers. Arya, perfect. She spent the night preparing. Every document, every thread that still connected them, she double-checked it all. There was nothing left for him to use against her. No financial ties. No legal obligations. Nothing. When she was sure everything was in place, she forced herself to sleep. The next morning, she got Theo ready for school like it was any other day. She made him breakfast, ruffled his curls, packed his lunch. But when he turned to leave, she hesitated, her hand resting on his shoulder just a moment longer than usual. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked, looking up at her. She nodded, smiling softly. "Yeah, bud. Everything's okay." He grinned, running off toward the front door. She watched until he disappeared into the school before turning toward the waiting car. The meeting was set in one of Marcus's private offices, a sleek, high-rise space designed to impress. The kind of place where power moved in quiet conversations over expensive coffee. The receptionist greeted her with a smile, offering her a glass of water as she led her to the conference room. Marcus was already there. He stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, his suit perfectly tailored, his posture effortless. The papers were neatly stacked in front of him, a pen placed precisely where he expected her to sign. "Arya," he said warmly, smiling as if this was just another business meeting. "This is going to change everything for us." She smiled back, slipping into the chair across from him. "I can't wait," she said. He slid the documents toward her, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. "This," he said, "is the kind of opportunity most people only dream about. A clean investment, low risk, massive return. The final step toward real financial security." She picked up the papers, flipping through them carefully. "Tell me more," she said. His smile widened. This was his favorite part, the explanation, the persuasion. He loved walking people to the edge of the decision and watching them step off it. He talked about projections, potential, the once-in-a-lifetime nature of the deal. He wove the perfect story, just enough truth layered into the lies to make them indistinguishable. She nodded along, took notes, let admiration flicker across her face at all the right moments. And then, finally, he pushed the pen toward her. "All you have to do is sign," he said, voice smooth as silk. Her fingers brushed the pen. She hesitated, just long enough for him to lean in slightly, reassuring, persuasive. "Arya, this is the smart move. You know that." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Of course," she said. "I trust you." His smile was victorious. He had no idea. The moment Arya stepped into the conference room, she felt it, the shift in the air, the invisible weight pressing down, the quiet hum of a moment about to change everything. Marcus was already there, standing behind the sleek mahogany table, his confidence woven into every detail. He had arranged everything perfectly. The crisp stack of documents sat in front of him, the pen placed deliberately on top, as if all she had to do was reach out and seal her fate. She walked toward him slowly, keeping her expression open, eager. "Arya," he said, his smile easy, warm. "You're right on time." She smiled back, slipping into the chair across from him. "I wouldn't miss it," she said. Marcus leaned forward, pushing the contract toward her. "This," he said smoothly, "is everything we talked about. The investment opportunity of a lifetime. A clean deal. Guaranteed returns. Completely secure." She picked up the papers, flipping through them, her fingers skimming over the printed text. It was an impressive illusion of legitimacy, pages of fine print, neatly formatted columns of numbers, industry jargon woven together in a way that made it look airtight. But she knew better. She nodded, pretending to study the details, letting a thoughtful expression cross her face. "It's a lot of money," she said. Marcus smiled, his voice rich with assurance. "That's the point. This is how we secure our future, Arya. You don't want to miss this." She tapped the pen against the table, hesitating just long enough to make him lean in slightly, his eyes fixed on her. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, tilting her head. "No risks?" He didn't even blink. "None. I've structured everything perfectly. It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance." She let her fingers trail over the paper, brushing the edge as if she were about to sign. That was when the door opened. The sound was small, quiet, but it hit like a thunderclap. Marcus's body tensed instinctively, but he masked it well. He straightened, turning toward the door just as the officer stepped inside. "Marcus Sullivan?" Marcus barely had time to register his name before the officer continued, his voice calm but firm. "You're under arrest for financial fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Arya didn't move. Marcus, to his credit, kept his composure. He turned fully, his expression unreadable. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice smooth but sharp at the edges. The officer didn't waver. "Stand up. Hands behind your back." Marcus didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he turned to Arya. Understanding flickered in his eyes. "You," he murmured. Arya tilted her head. "What about me?" His jaw clenched. "You set this up." She smiled, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "Did I?" His fingers curled into fists at his sides. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You think this means you win?" She leaned back slightly. "I think it means you lose." The officer took a step forward. "Mr. Sullivan, I won't ask again. Stand up." Marcus exhaled through his nose, his mask slipping just enough for her to see what lay beneath it. Frustration. Realization. She had never been under his control. Not really. He turned away from her, his movements precise, controlled, as he placed his hands behind his back. The click of the cuffs echoed in the room. As they led him toward the door, he twisted his head slightly, his gaze locking onto hers one last time. "This isn't over," he said. Arya met his eyes, her smile unwavering. "Oh, Marcus," she said lightly. "I think it is." The last thing she saw before he disappeared into the hallway was the look in his eyes, disbelief, anger, understanding all crashing together. And then he was gone. The first morning after Marcus was gone, Arya woke up to the kind of silence she had forgotten existed. A silence free of dread, free of waiting, free of the invisible weight that had pressed against her chest for months. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening. There were no unread messages from Marcus flashing on her phone. No carefully worded texts meant to pull her back in. No flowers waiting at her doorstep. No unshakable feeling of something creeping closer. It was over. She exhaled slowly, deeply, and let herself feel it. Freedom. It wasn't the kind of dramatic, sweeping moment movies made it out to be. It was quiet. Gentle. The kind of thing that settled into her bones instead of crashing over her all at once. She climbed out of bed, stretching as sunlight streamed through the curtains. The apartment felt different somehow, lighter. Maybe it was just her. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't waking up wondering what Marcus would do next. She walked barefoot into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. And there, standing on his tiptoes in front of the counter, was Theo. He had a butter knife in one hand, a slice of toast in the other, and a tub of peanut butter dangerously close to tipping over. Arya smiled. "What's all this?" Theo turned, grinning proudly. "I'm making breakfast. Figured you deserved it." Her heart softened instantly. "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah," he said, carefully spreading jelly onto the toast, most of it ending up on the counter. "You always make breakfast. So today, I wanted to do it." She leaned against the counter, watching him, warmth blooming in her chest. "That's really sweet, bud." Theo handed her a plate like he had just prepared a 5-star meal. She took a bite, even though the bread was more peanut butter than anything else. "Perfect," she said, ruffling his curls. Theo beamed, hopping onto a stool across from her. He looked different. Lighter. The worry that had been shadowing his eyes for weeks was gone. "How'd you sleep?" she asked. He shrugged. "Good." She hesitated. "Any dreams?" Theo shook his head, taking a big bite of his toast. "No nightmares." The words hit her like a quiet revelation. For weeks, his nights had been filled with restlessness. Waking up scared, whispering about the man in his dreams. But now, he was just a kid again, sitting at the table, happily stuffing his face with peanut butter and jelly. The future had changed. Arya let out a slow breath, relief sinking deep into her bones. Theo launched into a story about school, something about a science project gone wrong and baking soda exploding all over his classroom. Arya listened, really listened, to every word, soaking in the sound of his voice, the ease in his laughter. This was why she had done it. This was what she had been fighting for. Later that night, after Theo had fallen asleep, she padded back to her room, rubbing her tired eyes. She reached for the lamp, ready to turn it off, when she saw it. An envelope. She froze. It was sitting neatly on her nightstand, resting against the base of her lamp as if it had always been there. Her pulse kicked up. She moved toward it slowly, her breath catching as she picked it up. The paper felt thick, expensive. Familiar. She already knew what it was before she even unfolded it. Her eyes skimmed over the handwriting, slanted, precise. "You saved us. Thank you." Her hands tightened around the letter. She sat down on the edge of her bed, staring at the words, running her fingers over the ink as if they might disappear. She had done it. She had won the battle for their future. A shaky breath left her lips, and then another. She placed the letter back on the nightstand carefully, reverently. Then, without hesitation, she turned and walked toward Theo's room. She pushed his door open slightly, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way his face was relaxed, peaceful. He had spent so many nights tangled in nightmares, carrying fears he shouldn't have had to carry. But now, he was safe. They both were. Arya stepped forward, brushing his curls gently with her fingers before pressing a kiss to his forehead. She whispered against his skin, "We're okay now, baby." And for the first time, she truly believed it.